Hi, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy. Every week, you and I have the great benefit of listening to a conversation with some outstanding leader in the field of communication who has agreed to be with us. I'm delighted today to say that we do have one of the top communication experts in the world, Dianna Booher from Colleyville, Texas. Dianna, I met about 20 years ago, and I was so impressed at the time because I was aware then that she'd written about 20 books. Little did I know that 20 years later, her 47th book is coming out. How impressive is that? So she's a master of communication. She has worked with many Fortune 500 companies as a speaker, a consultant, a coach. She's appeared on many of the top television programs as a guest, so her being on camera is very natural here today. She works with companies to help them communicate more clearly, and she works with individuals to help leaders have a greater, more commanding presence. Today, again, it is a true honor to welcome one of the top 100 thought leaders in America, Dianna Booher.
Thank you,
Dianna,
Bill.
hello.
Hello, it's great to be with you.
Terrific to have you here as well. And since I mentioned your books, your multiple books, you've written more books than some people have read, I imagine. Since I mentioned your books, let's talk about writing for a minute. One of the things I've noticed that's a great piece of advice you give about writing is write as you speak. Tell us what you mean by that, and tell us how we can achieve that, please.
Well, maybe I should start with what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean with spurts. It doesn't mean with grammatical errors, because we all make grammatical errors when we speak. But what it does mean is just informally, conversationally, short sentences, simple words, informally. And it means that we don't flip the switch. I don't know if you know what I mean by that, but a lot of people write in passive voice, meaning they hide the doer. They write things like, these procedures should be reviewed. And I don't know if your house is like mine, but if you say something like, the garage shall be cleaned out today, you know who will do that. It'll be me. Unless you call names, things don't get done. And so when you write and you speak, you would normally say, somebody should review these procedures, or the marketing department should review these procedures. You put people in. And so when you write, you should do that.
You remind me so much of my graduate school dissertation director. I'm sure in college I had learned the difference between the active voice and the passive voice, but boy, did I learn it with my dissertation director, because he would make very sure that we knew that passive voice was not acceptable. I would think, Dianna, that you and I have both noticed over the past couple of decades that writing has become much less formal, much less stilted. It doesn't have the henceforth and the where to as and the person of the first part. All that lawyerese language, we might call it. It has become more person to person. Okay, how do we achieve that?
It has, in fact, the pendulum has swung the other way. I used to, when I started out teaching business writing and technical writing, I was really working with people to loosen up and become more conversational. And now sometimes people are so informal because they're used to writing text that they write almost like they were just writing the grocery bill. And so they have to match the subject that they're talking about. How informal is that? Are they keeping something on file for the next 5 years and it's going to have to stand up in court as a piece of evidence? They need to think about what's the use for this document and who is it going to and how formal is that. So there's several things that need to match so you know how formal it should be.
And the texting generation has changed things so much. For example, you and I are both aware that many elementary schools are no longer teaching cursive writing. They don't see any point in it. Why do we need a handwriting when we can just punch buttons now?
Right. But, people are taking habits from their text, like instead of writing RU, spelling out the words, just the letter RU, and putting that in a formal email that they're writing to the senior executive officer, and it may show up in a court case, and not capitalizing proper nouns when they're referring, say, to a form or a meeting that they attended. And that could change the meaning. I know when I talk about business writing, I will show them example sentences where the whole meaning of the statement changes. If you leave out a comma, it changes the meaning of the sentence, and it can mean the difference in an enormous amount of money that is owed in the situation. So people don't realize that grammar is not to trip them up, it's to make things clear. And it makes a great deal of difference.
Speaking of grammar, I noticed that one of your 47 books is on grammar. I know when I've taught all-day business writing courses as well, and I always include a section in there on grammar, because you can't assume, first of all, that people were taught grammar correctly, or even if they have kept up with it. And again, there have been some changes in what is acceptable grammar and what is not. And we have to teach the changes too, don't we?
Right. And when I first started teaching business writing, it was about thinking and being organizing your thoughts. And I thought senior executives would not really want that included. But I found that they said, no, it's about attitude. If you're careless about the grammar and the structure of a sentence, that tells me you don't care that much about the job. That's what I had the first executives who said, no, I want you to put a section in there on grammar, because it tells me and it tells our customers, if you're careless about the grammar, you're careless about how you amortize loans here. You're careless about how you service the airplane engines. And so it represents attitudes about a lot of things.
Switching topics, you are a well-known, highly in-demand keynote speaker. And so you, I'm sure, pay a lot of attention to speaking, and people want you to coach them as speakers. At the same time, as you work with corporations, large and small, you also make sure that not only do we think about delivering the message, but we think about how we receive it accurately and empathetically. In other words, to you, you believe that, as I understand it, that we need to give far more attention to good listening habits than we've been doing.
Absolutely. I've had executive vice presidents to say on their 360-degree feedback that they've been told if they don't listen. And I've shadowed some. I remember one executive vice president who said, I've had my people come in from all over the world, and they wanted me to sit in this meeting to see why the feedback was, you don't listen. And I sat there and observed him. He sat with one arm back behind the chair, slouched down with his hand like this when they would talk to him and give new ideas. And he was sitting there like this, like, I'm bored to death. And then at the end of the day, he said, well, tell me, do you have any idea why they might say, I don't listen? I said, are you kidding? Are you serious? And his total body language was, you can't tell me anything I haven't already heard. And I thought, with that attitude, with that body language, with the tone of voice he used, his word choice, everything said, I've heard it all, I've seen it all, I don't need you to tell me anything. And it was like, why should they speak up and give him any innovative ideas from their country when he was telling them in so many different ways, I don't want to hear your ideas. And it was like shocking to him.
That's where, of course, video can come in handy in training. If you're able to video someone in action, one of the things I constantly say about video is the camera does not lie. And it may be one thing for a consultant to say to them, you have a nonverbal message that comes across that just keeps someone from wanting to participate, or you seem insincere, or you look bored, as you suggested. And they might not take that as seriously as they would if you have the opportunity to video them in action. And it's a little difficult to argue with a camera.
It is. And I recall another situation where the CEO had called about an executive vice president he was going to send for coaching, actually on presentation skills. He said, while you're talking to this person, he totally tunes out in our vice presidential meetings when we have our board meeting. And he said, see if you can't get him to understand that we are paying him for his thought leadership. And he said he's brilliant. He brings in his division. He's the president of a certain division. His division brings in more profit than any other division of our entire corporate entity. But he will not listen to any other report. Once he gives his report on his division, he's tuned out. When I tried to get that point across, it was like he had never heard that before. He says, he's tuned into his email, to his text. Once he's in there for his little contribution, he's out of it. And he said, you mean they pay me to give ideas to other people? And I said, sure, your paycheck is not just for your division. You're to engage with the rest and share ideas. That was a totally foreign concept to him, that he was to engage and listen to what the others had going on in their entities, their divisions, their departments, and share ideas. It's just like he had never listened to what anybody else was doing in any other division. So for many people, their concept of communication is one way: output, 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 and nothing about the receiving.
I've often said that listening is probably one of our top communication skills, and yet we teach it the least and we practice it the worst.
Right.
And so I remember, Dianna, once when I started my career as a consultant, I was giving a presentation in Atlanta, and they asked me what my topic was going to be. And I said, well, my topic for your group, I'm going to talk about listen your way to the top. My host said, oh, that sounds like a great topic. Very interesting. She said, I'll put that in our handout. I get there to the meeting, and the handout has, as my program, speak your way to the top. So
just didn't even register, huh?
I pulled my host aside and I said, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but this would be a great time for me to point out that even though we say listen our way to the top, people don't catch that, and they still think we speak our way to the top. It's amazing when you have dealt with many prominent CEOs and working with Fortune 500 companies. I would imagine that there are a good number of them who in their presentation skills might be lacking, but in their listening skills, they're top level.
They are. And that's why many times they don't see the problem. Someone else has to come in, and it's not what they do in their consulting that's revolutionary. It's just that they've not been willing to listen to what their own people have said. That's the reason they have to bring in sometimes somebody from the outside who just goes around and listens to what their people are telling them.
This is time, I think, for a good transition to something else I mentioned in the introduction, and that is that you help professional leaders to improve their professional presence. What do you mean by that, and how do you accomplish that?
Well, basically, when you ask someone what they mean by executive presence, you get any number of answers. When I'm doing a keynote, I'll generally throw that out. How do define executive presence, and I'll get sometimes 30, 35 different answers, but I put it into 4 buckets: how you look, talk, think, and act. And what I mean by look, what you see visibly, and that could be anything from dress to movement to confidence. You can see somebody's confidence by how they walk, how they move, their posture. And then when I talk about talk, I'm talking about word choice. I'm talking about voice control, whether they're fluid in their sentence patterns or hesitant. You know, when you call somebody, let's say you've got a charge that's incorrect on your MasterCard, and you call and you say, this charge is not mine, and you have somebody who's, well, I'm not sure if I should take this off. I'll have to check. You immediately know you're not talking to the boss because of their hesitancy in their voice and the firmness of it.
Yes.
So that's what I mean when I talk about voice. And then their ability to think on their feet, when they're extemporaneous, how they control their emotions under pressure. When they get asked a question, they're doing a presentation, and somebody cuts in the middle of it and says, just a moment, I have a question here. How do they respond under pressure? Do they think coherently and logically to express themselves? And then the last category: look, talk, think, and then act. That's a big category, everything from character issues to their track record, their competence. All of that falls in that category. And obviously, I can't coach somebody on their character in a day's work in a corporation, but I can help with the first 3 things. You can teach confidence, somebody to appear confident. You can teach them about word choice and speaking confidently, and you can certainly teach someone to think on their feet. There is a format and a formula to doing that. And with practice, and you mentioned video recording them and shooting questions to them very quickly and teaching them that structure, those things can be taught, and people change and really can improve their presence very rapidly.
We'd like your opinion on something related to that. You and I remember, 25 years ago, I guess, the book that was so popular, Dress for Success. Okay, certainly business attire has changed dramatically. I can remember still maybe 15 years ago, the first time I boarded a commercial flight and I did not wear a tie. It really took some effort on my part to do that because I had been accustomed for many years. And there was a time when women wore suits on flights and heels, and it was a very formal occasion. I told some of my golf buddies last weekend, I would not like to be selling suits and ties now. They're not as much in demand. They were once required, absolutely. So what do you advise executives about professional dress?
You know, every different corporation has a different dress code that is not unclear to most people, except in one category, and it's the business casual that has people totally stumped. If the corporation says, look, we're going to have in our top VIP customers tomorrow, I want you to be aware of it and dress appropriately, people know what that is. If you say, hey, this is very casual day, we're going to have, a company picnic outing, whatever, people know how to do that. But the business casual category is what throws people. And what I do when they ask me specifically to tackle the dress is I actually have to take photographs. I take slides to say this is what visual business casual is for different levels in the organization, and it does vary. I always tell them to look at how your senior executives dress, and that's the picture for your industry, because it varies by industry. The financial industry is more formal than, let's say, the entertainment industry is, or the advertising industry. But if they can get a picture of where they want to go, the level in their organization that they want to be promoted to, and dress like that for business casual, that's a good directive.
I think that's a good point that you say, show them a picture of
Yes.
what's
And I'll
expected.
tell you another clue to pay attention to. Most people say, well, if I'm looking and I look at a new outfit, what do I pay attention to? Pay attention to the sleeves and pay attention to the collar. The collar is what makes a difference, makes something more formal, and the length of the sleeve. And I tell you that most executives will tell you if it has a collar on it, even though you don't have a tie, that makes the difference. But there are 4 or 5 things that you want to pay attention to, and that's the quality of the fabric, the cut of the fabric, the tailoring, and the fact that it's neat and that fits. Those are the key things that really make the difference in the attention to detail.
And that doesn't really mean it has to be expensive, does it?
No. The styles will change, but quality of fabric and the cut and the fit and the tailoring are things that say quality and attention to detail and give you the air of presence as opposed to the styles, because styles come and go. Those things don't change. And of course, the coloring should go with what fits your body style.
Since I'm very much colorblind, I have to get assistance.
That's always a good idea.
Yes, my spouse has been very helpful on that because I tested colorblind in the 6th grade, and it has the last time I took a colorblind test, I was at my ophthalmologist and I said I want to check up on that again. There were 20 items that they had me view, and so I guessed what I was supposed to see, and at the end of it I said, how did I score? They said, you got 3 of them right, but we think you were guessing. So for me,
stay with that assistant or that wife.
I'm telling you, it's a very important consideration for me. Why is it, Dianna, that many people feel it's a lifetime achievement to write one book? How did you get into writing so many books? Number 47 coming out. That's so unusual, even among somebody who does nothing but write. That's very unusual.
Well, that is just my giftedness. There are people who like to sell. There are people who like to do different things in life, and that is my gift. And so it is my passion. I would do that if they didn't pay me, if I didn't make money at it, I guess, because I'll have to tell you one tale about how excited I am about writing. I remember one evening, way a long time ago when I started out my career, I sat down, I was supposed to go to a party. My husband was out of town, so I didn't have anybody to remind me. I was supposed to go to a party at 7 o'clock. It was 6, I was ready, dressed for the party. I sat down and thought, I will write one more scene on this novel. And I sat down to the computer, and the next time I looked up, it was 11 o'clock. I had totally missed the party. That's how absorbed I get in writing. It's just something that gives me great personal satisfaction.
Well, there's a runner's high, and I guess there's a writer's high as well.
There is. And so as soon as, I don't really enjoy marketing the books. I don't really, I do it. I do the interviews. I talk to reporters and journalists, and I just enjoy the writing part of it. It's a thing with me.
If you were to compare, and you can do this very quickly, if you were to compare the joy that you get from writing versus the joy you get from speaking, are they equal, or does one, what?
No, I would far more, I love writing far more than I do speaking. Speaking just happened after writing. Once I wrote the first book, Shell Oil called me and said, hey, actually the vice president of engineering was sitting in the library. He had checked out the book, my first business book. And he said, can you come out and teach our engineers how to do this? And I thought, well, yes, I can. So I began there in Shell Oil. And then when I was on a book tour, my publisher had sent me on a book tour. I had a little spot on the ABC lead into the news, and IBM called me and said, hey, can you come teach us IBMers how to do this? And that's how I began speaking, just being called from the book. And so the speaking career just evolved from writing. And that's how I speak now, people calling, passing my name around from what I've written in the book. But I never intended to be a speaker. Although I've been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah, were you one of these people who knew in grade school, maybe you had a teacher who encouraged you to write? Was there anybody who propelled you to write, or it just came naturally to you?
No, I had never, ever known anyone who was writing. I grew up in a very small town, and I actually had 2 toddlers, and I was thinking, I need to make a living doing this. Doing something that I can stay home with my kids. I don't want to take them out to a daycare. And I asked a friend, he said, well, what did you like to do? And I said, well, I used to like to write English compositions, but I don't know how to make a living at that. And he says, I suggest you find out. So I went to the public library. It was before the days of the internet, checked out every book in the 800 section on how to write greeting card verses, how to write spy thrillers, how to write articles. I just cleaned them out, about 50 or 60 books, piled them in the back seat of my car, went home and read for about 3 weeks on how to write all these things. And it was just a fluke, I realize now, and found out how to write a book, sent in something, and got something published. And that was a real fluke to get something published right off the bat.
I wouldn't call it a fluke, because you did your homework and you had the talent, and you put those 2 together. It's not a fluke. I wish that there were no such thing as a clock, but there is, and we're going to be winding down. We do have your promise that you will be our guest again on the Biz Communication Show. We need 2 things before we go. First, tell us about your upcoming book. When will it be out? What's that all about?
Yes, it'll be out in June. It's called Communicate Like a Leader. Connecting strategically to coach, inspire, and get things done. And that is for the leader who actually needs to stop micromanaging and do the essential strategic communicating.
I had some bosses that I wish that book had been in their hands. How not to micromanage.
Most people do hate to be micromanaged, but it prevents micromanagement by doing it on a higher level, the essential things.
Okay, now please give us your contact information, because people who have watched this interview will definitely want to know how to get in touch with you. So what are your preferred ways? What social media would you like to mention?
Yes, my website is Booher Research, and my name is Booher. Booher, the H is just silent, BooherResearch.com. And I'm just go by my name on all social media. They can find me at Booher, Dianna Booher, on LinkedIn or Twitter. I've got about 20,000 followers on Twitter and Facebook as well.
You've got a lot of followers who don't even follow you there, I'm sure. And of course, I'm delighted personally to have this opportunity, and professionally as well. You have done us a great service by being with us. And to those of you who have been our guest on the Biz Communication Show today, we know that you have benefited tremendously. Look forward to being with you next week, when again we will have an outstanding communication expert to share their tips and strategies with us so that we can communicate more effectively. Again, Dianna, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Bill.